The scream that tore from Catherine Zimmerman's throat vanished into the howling wind. The moment her husband's hands shoved her through the cabin door into the February blizzard of 1877. She hit the snow hard, the frozen ground knocking the air from her lungs as ice crystals immediately began coating her thin cotton nightgown. The door slammed behind her with a finality that spoke of death, and she heard the heavy wooden bar slide into place. "Please, Walter," she cried, pounding her fists against the rough timber until her knuckles split and bled. "I'm sorry. Please let me back in." No answer came except the shrieking wind that tore through the mountains surrounding their isolated ranch in the Colorado Territory. Catherine's bare feet were already numb, her body shaking violently as the storm consumed her. Walter had been drinking again, raging about the money she'd spent on fabric in town, calling her wasteful and ungrateful. When she tried to defend herself, explaining she needed material to mend his shirts, his face had twisted with such hatred that she'd barely recognized the man she'd married 3 years ago. She stumbled away from the cabin, knowing he wouldn't relent. Walter never did when the whiskey had him. The snow was already knee-deep and rising, the temperature plummeting as night fell across the mountain valley. Catherine wrapped her arms around herself, her teeth chattering so hard she thought they might shatter. She couldn't feel her hands anymore, couldn't feel her feet. The world was nothing but white and cold and wind. Her mind grew foggy as she pushed forward through the drifts, not knowing where she was going, only that she had to move, had to survive. But the cold was seeping into her bones now, making her thoughts slow and thick like molasses. She stumbled and fell, struggled back to her feet, fell again. The third time she couldn't get up. The snow felt almost warm now, soft like a feather bed, and Catherine found herself wanting to sleep. Just for a moment, she thought. Just close my eyes for one moment. Darkness claimed her consciousness as the storm raged on. Joshua Shepherd had been riding through the mountain pass when the blizzard hit, trying to get back to his ranch before the worst of it arrived. He'd failed, but he knew these mountains like the back of his hand. There was an old line shack about a mile north that would provide shelter until the storm passed. He urged his horse Copper forward, squinting against the driving snow, his thick sheepskin coat and leather gloves the only things keeping him from freezing. Something in the snow caught his eye. A dark shape that didn't belong, half buried already by the accumulating drifts. Joshua pulled Copper to a halt, his heart suddenly pounding. He dismounted quickly, stumbling through the knee-deep snow toward what he now realized was a person, a woman. Dear God, a woman in nothing but a nightgown. He dropped to his knees beside her, yanking off his glove to press his fingers against her throat. Her skin was ice-cold, blue-tinged, but there beneath his fingertips he felt it a faint, thready pulse. She was alive. Barely. "Madam, madam, can you hear me?" Joshua shook her gently, but she didn't respond. Her lips were blue, her face deathly pale, and when he pulled back her eyelids her pupils were dilated and unfocused. Hypothermia, advanced stages. He'd seen it before in cattle caught in late winter storms. If he didn't act fast, she'd die. Joshua scooped her into his arms, shocked at how light she was, how fragile she felt against his chest. He secured her on Copper's saddle in front of him, keeping her wrapped in his arms, sharing what body heat he could as he urged his horse toward the line shack. Every second counted now. The ride felt like it took hours, though it was probably only 20 minutes. By the time Joshua kicked open the door of the small cabin, his own hands were numb with cold. He carried the woman inside, thanking God that the shack still had a stack of dry firewood and an old iron stove. He laid her on the floor not gently, because there was no time for gentle, and immediately set about building a fire. His hands shook as he struck the match. but he got the kindling lit, then added larger pieces of wood until flames were crackling in the stove. Heat began to fill the small space, but the woman on the floor wasn't moving, wasn't responding. Her breathing was so shallow he could barely detect it. Joshua knew what he had to do next, and he didn't hesitate despite the impropriety. Hypothermia victims needed warmth, direct body heat, or they'd die. He quickly stripped off his wet coat and shirt, then carefully removed the woman's soaked nightgown. Her skin was like ice beneath his hands, mottled and bluish. He grabbed the old blankets from the bunk in the corner, dusty but dry, and wrapped them both in the rough wool, pulling her body against his bare chest. She was so cold, too cold. Her breath came in tiny, infrequent gasps, and Joshua realized with horror that she was slipping away despite everything he was doing. Her heartbeat against his chest was barely there, stuttering and weak. "No," he said firmly, tipping her head back. "You don't get to die on me, not tonight." He covered her mouth with his, breathing warm air into her lungs. Once, twice, 3 times. He'd seen a doctor do this once with a boy who'd nearly drowned in the river. "Breathe for them," the doctor had said. "Give them your breath until they can breathe on their own." Joshua pressed his lips to hers again, breathing life into her body, willing her to fight to come back. He rubbed her arms and legs vigorously, trying to stimulate circulation without causing damage to frozen tissue. Between rescue breaths, he spoke to her. "Come on now, stay with me. You're safe now. I've got you." He breathed into her mouth again, and this time he felt something, a small response, a slight movement of her chest independent of his breath. Encouraged, he continued, alternating between rescue breaths and warming her body with his own, holding her close against him beneath the blankets. Minutes passed like hours. The fire roared in the stove, heating the small space until sweat began to bead on Joshua's forehead. Still he held her, breathed for her, refused to let death claim her. Then suddenly she gasped, a real breath, deep and shuddering. Her eyelids fluttered. Her body jerked in his arms, and a small moan escaped her lips. "That's it," Joshua encouraged, relief flooding through him. "Come on back now. You're safe." Catherine's eyes opened slowly, unfocused and confused. She was warm, so wonderfully warm, but nothing made sense. She wasn't in the snow anymore, wasn't dying. Instead, she was wrapped in something soft, held against something solid and warm that she realized with a start was a man's bare chest. She tried to pull away, panic flooding through her, but her body wouldn't obey. She was too weak, too disoriented. "Easy now," a deep voice said above her head. "You're safe, madam. I found you in the snow. You were freezing to death. I'm just trying to warm you up." Memories came flooding back, Walter's rage, the door slamming, the terrible cold. She'd been dying. She remembered that clearly, the strange warmth that had come over her as she'd lain in the snow, the overwhelming desire to sleep forever. "My husband," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "He threw me out." The chest beneath her cheek stiffened. "Into the storm. In that nightgown." Catherine managed a tiny nod. She could feel tears sliding down her cheeks now, hot against her still cold skin. "He was drinking. He gets so angry when he drinks." The man's arms tightened around her, but gently, protectively. "Well, he's a damned fool and worse. No man throws his wife into a blizzard and deserves to call himself a man." They stayed like that as the fire warmed the cabin and Catherine's body slowly came back to life. It hurt, that warming, a terrible burning sensation in her fingers and toes, in her nose and cheeks. She whimpered against the pain. "I know it hurts," the man said softly. "That's good though, means you're getting feeling back, means nothing's frozen beyond saving." "Who are you?" Catherine managed to ask. "Joshua Shepherd. I've got a ranch about 10 miles south of here." I was heading home when the storm hit, decided to shelter here until it passed. Lucky I did." "Lucky," Catherine repeated weakly. "You saved my life. Couldn't very well leave you out there to die." As the hours passed and Catherine grew stronger, Joshua helped her sit up, keeping the blankets wrapped around her. He'd found an old shirt in the cabin that someone had left behind years ago, threadbare but clean, and he helped her into it to preserve her modesty. Only then did he pull his own shirt back on, though he stayed close, monitoring her condition. "What's your name?" he asked, offering her water from his canteen. Catherine Zimmerman. "My husband Walter and I have a ranch about 3 miles west of here." "I know the place," Joshua said, his jaw tightening. "Bought it about 4 years ago from the Patterson family." Catherine nodded, sipping the water slowly. "Walter moved us here from Kansas, said he wanted to raise cattle, make our fortune." She laughed bitterly. "Instead he found whiskey and cruelty." Joshua studied her in the firelight. Even bedraggled and recovering from hypothermia, she was beautiful. Dark hair that fell past her shoulders, delicate features, eyes that held both sadness and strength. He judged her to be in her mid-20s, around his own age of 28. "How long has he been treating you like this?" Joshua asked quietly. Catherine looked away. "The drinking started about a year after we married. The anger came with it. Tonight was the first time he ever—" She couldn't finish the sentence. "Tried to kill you," Joshua finished grimly. "That's what he did, madam. Throwing you out in a blizzard in your nightclothes, that's attempted murder." "He's my husband," Catherine said, though the words held no conviction. "That doesn't give him the right to harm you. No marriage vow gives a man that right." The storm howled outside, and Joshua knew they'd be trapped in this cabin together until it passed, probably until morning at least. He stood and checked the firewood supply, added another log to the stove. "You should rest," he said. "Get your strength back. In the morning, when the storm clears, we'll figure out what to do." "I can't go back," Catherine said suddenly, her voice stronger than it had been. "I can't go back to him." Joshua turned to look at her, saw the determination in her eyes despite her exhaustion. "Then you won't. I give you my word on that." He settled against the wall near the stove, giving her the bunk with its thin mattress and the blankets. Catherine protested weakly, but Joshua insisted. She needed the rest more than he did. He'd keep watch, keep the fire going, make sure she stayed warm through the night. But as Catherine drifted off to sleep, Joshua found himself unable to look away from her. There was something about this woman, something beyond just her beauty or his natural instinct to protect someone in need. When he'd breathed life back into her lungs, when he'd felt her heart start to beat stronger against his chest, something had shifted inside him. He barely knew her, had only just learned her name, but already he knew his life had changed in some fundamental way. The storm raged through the night, but inside the line shack, warmth and safety prevailed. Morning came with an eerie quiet. The wind had stopped, and when Joshua opened the door, brilliant sunshine reflected off a world transformed into white. The snow had drifted as high as Copper's belly in places, and the air was so cold it hurt to breathe. Catherine woke slowly, disoriented until memory returned. She sat up on the bunk, pulling the blanket around her shoulders. Joshua was crouched by the stove, heating water in an old tin pot he'd found in the cabin. "How are you feeling?" he asked when he noticed she was awake. "Sore. My fingers and toes hurt terribly." She looked at her hands, saw the redness and swelling. "But alive, thanks to you." Joshua poured the hot water into a cup and brought it to her. "It's just water, I'm afraid, no coffee or tea, but it's warm." Catherine wrapped her hands around the cup gratefully, letting the heat seep into her still cold fingers. "I don't know how to thank you. You risked your own life to save mine. Any decent person would have done the same." Walter wouldn't have, Catherine said quietly. He proved that last night. Joshua sat on the edge of the bunk, keeping a respectful distance. What do you want to do, Catherine? I meant what I said last night. You don't have to go back to him. I have nothing, she said, tears threatening again. No money of my own, no family. My parents passed away before I married Walter. I have nowhere to go. You could come to my ranch, Joshua said, the words tumbling out before he could think better of them. I mean properly. My housekeeper, Mrs. Chen, lives in the main house with her husband who manages the stable. You could stay with them, help with the housekeeping if you wanted to earn your keep, though that's not necessary. You'd be safe there, protected. Catherine looked at him, searching his face. Why would you do that for me? You don't even know me. Joshua met her eyes steadily. Because it's the right thing to do, and because. He paused, then decided honesty was best. Because in the short time since I found you, I've come to care what happens to you. I know that sounds strange. No, Catherine interrupted softly. It doesn't sound strange. When I woke up wrapped in your arms, feeling your heartbeat against my back, breathing in time with you, I felt safer than I have in 3 years. I felt like maybe there were still good men in this world. They looked at each other for a long moment, something passing between them that neither could quite name yet, but both recognized as significant. We should get moving, Joshua said finally, breaking the spell. I need to get you somewhere warm and proper. Get those fingers and toes looked at to make sure there's no serious damage. The ride to Joshua's ranch took most of the day. He'd bundled Catherine in his sheepskin coat over the old shirt, and she rode in front of him on Copper again, his arms around her to keep her steady and warm. They didn't go past the Zimmerman ranch, Joshua deliberately taking a longer route to avoid any chance of encountering Walter. Catherine was grateful for that. The thought of seeing her husband filled her with a fear so profound it made her feel sick. What would he do when he discovered she'd survived? Would he come looking for her? Would he claim his rights as her husband and try to take her back? As if sensing her thoughts, Joshua spoke near her ear. He won't touch you again. I promise you that. The Shepherd Ranch was impressive, larger than Catherine had expected. A sturdy 2-story house sat in a valley protected by pine-covered hills, with a large barn, stable, and several outbuildings. Cattle grazed in the distance, dark shapes against the white snow. Smoke rose from the house's chimney, a welcoming sign of warmth and life. A small Chinese woman came out onto the porch as they rode up, followed by a lean man with gray, streaked black hair. Mrs. Chen took one look at Catherine's condition and immediately began speaking in rapid Chinese to her husband, gesturing toward the house. Mrs. Chen says we need to get you inside right away, Joshua translated, though it was fairly obvious. He helped Catherine down from the horse, then swept her up into his arms when she stumbled, her legs weak from the long ride. Mr. Chen will handle Copper. Let's get you warm. Inside, the house was cozy and well kept, with handsome furniture and warm rugs on the floor. Mrs. Chen had already disappeared upstairs, and Joshua carried Catherine up after her. The older woman had prepared a bedroom, not the master bedroom, Catherine noted with relief, but a guest room with a pretty brass bed and a cheerful quilt. Mrs. Chen spoke in Chinese to Joshua, who nodded and responded in the same language, though with a thick accent that made the housekeeper smile despite the situation. She's going to help you wash and get into proper clothes, Joshua explained to Catherine. She's about your size, and she's bringing you some of her things to wear until we can get you your own. I'll be downstairs. Call if you need anything. After he left, Mrs. Chen proved to be as efficient as she was kind. She helped Catherine strip off the borrowed shirt and Joshua's coat, gasping at the bruises on Catherine's arms and back from where Walter had grabbed her and from her fall into the snow. She brought warm water and soap, helping Catherine wash, then dressed her in a soft flannel dress that was indeed nearly a perfect fit. All the while, Mrs. Chen spoke in soothing tones, though Catherine didn't understand the words. She didn't need to. The kindness transcended language. That evening, Catherine sat at the dining table with Joshua, Mr. and Mrs. Chen insisting on eating in the kitchen despite Joshua's protests that they should join them. He explained to Catherine that they preferred it that way, honoring their own customs while still being treated as valued members of the household rather than mere servants. "How did you end up with a Chinese housekeeper in Colorado?" Catherine asked, curious. "Mr. Chen worked on the railroad until he was injured. His back gave out from the hard labor. Mrs. Chen was working in a laundry in Denver, and they were barely scraping by. I met them when I was in town buying cattle, saw how they were being treated. People can be cruel to those who are different. I offered them positions here. That was 5 years ago. They're family now, and they run this place better than I ever could alone." Catherine felt warmth spread through her chest at his words, at the casual kindness with which he spoke of helping people others scorned. "You're a good man, Joshua Shepherd." He looked uncomfortable with the praise. "I just try to do right by people." Over dinner, a hearty stew that Mrs. Chen had prepared, Joshua and Catherine talked. She told him about her life before Walter, how she'd been a school teacher in Kansas, how she'd met Walter at a church social and been charmed by his promises of adventure and a new life in Colorado. How different reality had been from those promises. Joshua told her about his ranch, how he'd built it from nothing over the past 7 years, starting with a small herd and a lot of determination. He spoke of his parents who'd passed away from fever when he was 20, leaving him their modest savings, which he'd used to head west and make his own way. "I always thought when I married, it would be to someone who wanted to build something together," Joshua said. "Someone who saw the ranch as a partnership, not just as my property that they got to share." He looked at Catherine. "Someone strong enough to handle the hard parts and wise enough to enjoy the good parts." Catherine's heart beat faster at the implication in his words, but she forced herself to remember reality. "I'm still married, Joshua. In the eyes of the law, I'm Walter's wife." "In the eyes of the law, he tried to murder you," Joshua countered. "That's grounds for divorce in any court that's worth a damn." "Divorce," Catherine whispered. The word was scandalous, shameful. Divorced women were social pariahs. But then again, she'd already been cast out into a blizzard to die. How much lower could she fall? "Think about it," Joshua said gently. "You don't have to decide anything tonight. You're safe here. That's what matters right now." The next few days fell into a comfortable routine. Catherine helped Mrs. Chen around the house, grateful to have something to occupy her hands and mind. Her fingers and toes were healing well, the swelling going down, the pain fading. She'd been lucky no permanent damage from the frostbite. Joshua was out working most days, checking on his cattle and repairing fences damaged by the storm. But every evening he came back to the house, and he and Catherine would have dinner together, talking long into the night by the fireplace. They discovered they shared a love of books, and Joshua had an impressive collection in his study. They discussed everything from Shakespeare to farming techniques, from politics to philosophy. Catherine found herself laughing for the first time in years, found herself looking forward to each evening when Joshua would come through the door, his face lighting up when he saw her. It was on the 5th day that reality came crashing back. Catherine was in the kitchen with Mrs. Chen, learning to make the older woman's dumpling recipe, when they heard horses outside and then angry voices. Joshua's voice, firm and cold, and another voice that made Catherine's blood turn to ice. "Walter." She dropped the rolling pin, her hands shaking. Mrs. Chen gripped her arm, speaking urgently in Chinese, but Catherine couldn't understand, couldn't think. She moved toward the kitchen door, drawn by some horrible need to see what was happening. Through the window, she could see Joshua standing in the yard, facing Walter, who sat atop a horse, another man beside him, the sheriff from the nearest town, 40 miles south. "She's my wife," Walter was shouting, his face red with rage. "You got no right keeping her here." "I have every right to give shelter to a woman you tried to kill," Joshua responded, his hand resting on the gun at his hip. "Sheriff, this man threw his wife out into a blizzard in her nightgown, left her to die in the snow. That's attempted murder." The sheriff, an older man with a weathered face, looked uncomfortable. "Now that's a serious accusation, Mr. Shepard. You got proof of that. I have Catherine's testimony. I have the fact that I found her half frozen to death 3 miles from their ranch wearing nothing but a thin nightgown. I have bruises on her body from where he manhandled her." "Bruises don't prove nothing," Walter snarled. "She's clumsy, always falling down, and she wandered out in her sleep, walked right past me. I didn't even know she'd gone out until morning." "That's a lie," Catherine said, stepping out onto the porch despite Mrs. Chen's attempt to hold her back. All 3 men turned to look at her. Walter's eyes narrowed with an ugly combination of rage and something that looked almost like fear. "Catherine," he said, his voice changing to something almost wheedling. "Thank God you're all right. I've been so worried. Come on now, get your things. We're going home." "No," Catherine said, her voice shaking but firm. She moved to stand beside Joshua, drawing strength from his presence. "I'm not going anywhere with you, Walter. You threw me out into that storm. You barred the door when I begged you to let me back in. You meant for me to die." "She's hysterical," Walter said to the sheriff. "You can see she's not in her right mind." "That's my wife, and I got a legal right to take her home." The sheriff looked between them, clearly torn. "Madam, are you saying your husband deliberately put you out in the storm?" "Yes," Catherine said clearly. "He'd been drinking. He was angry about money I'd spent on fabric. When I tried to defend myself, he dragged me to the door and pushed me out into the snow. Then he locked the door. I would have died if Joshua hadn't found me." "She's lying to protect her lover," Walter spat. "She probably ran off with Shepard here, and now she's making up stories to justify her adultery." Joshua's hand moved toward his gun, but Catherine caught his arm. "No, he's not worth it." The sheriff sighed heavily. "Look, this is a domestic matter, and I don't like getting involved in those." "But Mr. Zimmerman, you got a legal right to your wife. Mrs. Zimmerman, if you want to make accusations against your husband, you need to come into town and file a proper complaint. But right now, the law says you belong with your husband." "The law is wrong," Joshua said flatly. "Maybe so, but it's still the law. Now, Mrs. Zimmerman, you need to gather your things." "And if she refuses?" Joshua asked, his voice dangerous. "Then I'll have to compel her, and you'll be arrested for harboring another man's wife and interfering with legal custody." The sheriff looked genuinely regretful. "I'm sorry, madam, but that's how it is." Catherine felt tears sliding down her cheeks, felt her world collapsing again. She'd been free for 5 beautiful days, had started to imagine a different life, and now it was being ripped away. "Give us a moment," Joshua said to the sheriff. "Let me talk to her." The sheriff nodded, and Joshua took Catherine's hand, leading her back inside. In the hallway, out of sight of the others, he gripped both her hands in his. "Listen to me," he said urgently. "I won't let him hurt you again. I swear that on my life, but we need to be smart about this. What choice do I have? The law says I'm his property. The law can be changed, challenged." Joshua's mind was racing. What if you weren't his wife anymore? Divorce takes time, requires grounds, requires. What if the marriage was never legal in the first place? Joshua interrupted. Where were you married? Kansas. A church wedding. Joshua's face fell, then brightened again. Was it recorded properly, filed with the county? Catherine frowned, thinking back. I don't know. Walter handled all that. He said he'd take care of the paperwork. But you never saw the certificate yourself, never saw it filed. No, he said he had it, but I never actually saw it after the ceremony. Joshua's eyes were intense. Then maybe there is no legal marriage. Maybe Walter never filed the papers. Some men don't, especially if they're already married somewhere else or if they want to be able to walk away clean. It was a long shot, but it was something. Catherine nodded slowly. What do we do? You go with them for now. I know that's terrifying, but listen, I'm going to ride to Kansas tonight, fast as I can. I'll check the marriage records in your county. If there's no record of your marriage, then you're not legally his wife, and he has no claim on you. It'll take me maybe 2 weeks round trip if I push hard. 2 weeks, Catherine whispered. 2 weeks alone with Walter. I'll send Mr. Chen to check on you, make sure you're safe. And if Walter lays one hand on you, Chen will come get me no matter where I am, and I'll ride back and shoot Walter myself. Legal or not. Catherine knew it was the best plan they had. She nodded, trying to be brave. All right, but Joshua, yes, come back, please come back. He cupped her face in his hands, his touch gentle. Nothing in this world could stop me from coming back to you, I swear it. Then, before he could think better of it, Joshua leaned down and kissed her. It was soft and brief, barely more than a brush of lips, but it sent warmth flooding through Catherine's entire body. It was everything a kiss should be, tender and promising and full of hope. When he pulled back, his eyes were blazing with determination. 2 weeks. Hold on for 2 weeks. Catherine gathered the few belongings she had, the clothes Mrs. Chen had given her, and walked back outside. Walter's expression was triumphant as she approached, but Catherine kept her face blank, emotionless. Smart choice, Walter said. Now get up here. Joshua helped her mount behind Walter, their eyes meeting one last time. Then she was riding away from the Shepherd Ranch, away from safety, back toward the cabin that had nearly been her grave. The ride back was silent. Walter didn't speak to her, and Catherine didn't try to talk to him. When they reached the ranch, he grabbed her arm roughly and pulled her inside. The cabin looked exactly as it had the night he'd thrown her out. Dishes still dirty in the basin, his whiskey bottle on the table, the bar still across the door. Catherine felt sick looking at it. You made me look like a fool, Walter said quietly, and that was somehow more frightening than if he'd been shouting. Running off to another man's house, making accusations. They weren't accusations, they were the truth. His hand shot out and gripped her jaw, forcing her to look at him. You're my wife. You'll do as I say and go where I tell you, and if you ever try to leave me again, I'll hunt you down and make sure you disappear for good. Understand? Catherine said nothing, just stared at him with cold eyes. After a moment, Walter released her with a shove. Make me dinner. I'm hungry. The next 2 weeks were the longest of Catherine's life. She moved through the days like a ghost, cooking and cleaning and staying as far from Walter as possible. He drank every night, but he didn't hit her. Didn't touch her at all, actually, which was a small mercy. Perhaps he was afraid of marking her again, afraid of giving Joshua more ammunition for his accusations. Mr. Chen came by on the 3rd day, ostensibly selling eggs from the Shepherd Ranch. He spoke only a little English, but he managed to ask if she was all right. Catherine nodded, lying, trying to convey with her eyes that she was surviving. Mr. Chen looked at her for a long moment, then said quietly, Mr. Joshua come back soon. You stay strong. Those words kept her going through the dark days. Joshua would come back. He'd sworn it. On the 14th day, Catherine was hanging laundry on the line behind the cabin when she heard horses. Her heart leaped into her throat. Was it Joshua? But it was too early. He couldn't be back yet, unless he'd ridden himself and his horse into the ground. She came around the corner of the cabin and stopped dead. Joshua was there, dismounting from a horse that was lathered with sweat and clearly exhausted. He looked like he hadn't slept in days, his face haggard and unshaven, but his eyes were bright with triumph. Walter came out of the cabin, a rifle in his hands. "Get off my property, Shepherd." Joshua held up a hand, showing he was unarmed. "I've got something to show you, Zimmerman, something that's going to change everything." He pulled a folded paper from his saddlebag and opened it, holding it up. "This is a certificate from the county clerk in Harrison County, Kansas. It's a statement that there is no record of any marriage between Walter Zimmerman and Catherine Zimmerman, formerly Catherine Zielinski. Your marriage was never legally recorded." Catherine felt her heart stop. "What does that mean?" "It means," Joshua said, his eyes never leaving Walter's face, "that in the eyes of the law you two were never married, which means he has no legal claim on you whatsoever." Walter's face had gone pale, then red. "That's impossible." "We were married by a preacher, a traveling preacher who you paid $20 to perform a ceremony and who rode off the next day without filing any paperwork," Joshua said. "I tracked him down. Took some doing, but I found him in Missouri. He remembered you, Walter. He also remembered that you specifically told him not to file the marriage certificate because you wanted to handle it yourself. You never did though, did you?" "Why?" Catherine asked, looking at Walter. "Why would you do that?" Walter's jaw worked, but no sound came out. Joshua answered for him. "Because he was already married. I checked further back in the records. Walter Zimmerman married a woman named Sarah Porter in 1869 in Illinois. She died in 1872. He never filed for the death certificate. Then he married another woman in St. Louis in 1873, a woman named Emma Grant. She died under mysterious circumstances in 1874. He never filed for that death certificate either." Catherine felt like the ground was tilting beneath her feet. "He's killed before. I would have been the third." "Not going to let that happen," Joshua said firmly. He looked at Walter. "I've already spoken to the sheriff. Told him everything I found. There's going to be an investigation into those deaths, and even if they can't prove murder, you're done in this territory. You've got 24 hours to pack your things and get out of Colorado. If you're still here after that, you'll be arrested for fraud and attempted murder, and I'll personally testify against you." Walter's hand tightened on the rifle, and for a moment Catherine thought he might actually shoot Joshua. But then something in Walter seemed to collapse. He lowered the gun, his face twisted with rage and defeat. "She's not worth all this," he spat. "She's just a woman. You're welcome to her." He turned and went back into the cabin, slamming the door. Joshua immediately moved to Catherine's side, taking her hands in his. "Are you all right?" "Did he hurt you?" "No," Catherine said, her voice shaking. "He didn't touch me. I can't believe I was never actually married to him. All these years." "All these years you were free and didn't know it," Joshua said. "I'm so sorry it took so long to figure out." "I rode as hard as I could." Catherine threw her arms around his neck, hugging him tightly. "You saved me. Again, how can I ever repay you?" Joshua's arms came around her, holding her close. "There's no debt. There never was. I did it because—" He pulled back enough to look at her face, his expression serious. "Because I'm in love with you, Catherine. I know it's fast, I know it's crazy, but I fell in love with you that first night in the line shack when you opened your eyes and looked at me like I'd hung the moon. And every day since then, I've only fallen deeper." Tears were streaming down Catherine's face, but they were good tears, joyful tears. "I love you too. I think I started falling in love with you when you breathed life back into my lungs, when your heartbeat was the only thing keeping me tethered to this world. You're the best man I've ever known, Joshua Shepherd." He kissed her then, properly this time, deep and passionate and full of promise. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, Joshua was smiling. "Come home with me," he said. "Come home to the ranch and never leave. Be my partner in all things. Marry me, Catherine, truly and legally and forever." "Yes," Catherine said without hesitation. "Yes to all of it." They packed her few belongings. She didn't want anything Walter had given her and rode away from that cabin forever. Catherine didn't look back once. That chapter of her life was over, dead and buried like it should have been months ago. At the Shepherd Ranch, Mrs. Chen cried happy tears when she heard the news, immediately beginning to plan a wedding celebration. Mr. Chen shook Joshua's hand solemnly and told Catherine in his careful English that she was family now, that they would protect her always. Joshua and Catherine were married 3 weeks later in the same church, where Walter had once forced her to attend services that now felt like a lifetime ago. The traveling judge who performed the ceremony made absolutely certain all the paperwork was properly filed and recorded, even going so far as to file copies in 3 different counties. "No one will ever question the legality of this marriage," the judge said firmly, handing them their certificate. The wedding was small, just the couple, Mr. and Mrs. Chen, a few of Joshua's ranch hands, and some neighbors who'd heard the story and wanted to show their support. Catherine wore a simple blue dress that Mrs. Chen had sewn for her, and she carried wildflowers that grew in the mountain meadows. She'd never been more beautiful, Joshua thought, or more happy. When the judge pronounced them man and wife and Joshua kissed his bride, Catherine felt something click into place deep in her soul. This was right. This was what marriage was supposed to be, a partnership built on love and respect and mutual care. The celebration lasted into the evening, with Mrs. Chen providing an incredible feast and Mr. Chen playing a stringed instrument Catherine had never seen before, creating music that was both haunting and joyful. Joshua and Catherine danced in the yard under the stars, holding each other close, both marveling at how quickly their lives had changed. That night in Joshua's bedroom that was now their bedroom, they made love for the first time. It was nothing like Catherine's experiences with Walter had been. Those had been duty, obligation, something to be endured. This was different. This was tender and passionate, giving and receiving, 2 people learning each other's bodies with reverence and joy. Afterward, as they lay tangled together in the moonlight streaming through the window, Catherine traced patterns on Joshua's chest. "I never knew it could be like this," she said softly. "I never knew love could feel like this." Joshua kissed her forehead. "This is just the beginning. We have a whole lifetime ahead of us to discover everything together." The months that followed were the happiest of Catherine's life. She threw herself into the ranch work, proving to have a natural talent for managing the business side of things. Her teaching background meant she was good with numbers and organization, and soon she'd reorganized Joshua's record-keeping system and was handling negotiations with buyers in Denver. She and Joshua worked side by side every day, partners in every sense of the word. They'd ride out together to check on the cattle, spend hours planning improvements to the ranch, sit up late into the night discussing their dreams for the future. Mr. and Mrs. Chen became the family neither of them had any more. The couple taught Catherine to cook Chinese dishes, and she taught Mrs. Chen to read English. Mr. Chen showed Joshua new techniques he'd learned working with horses on the railroad, and Joshua made sure the Chens were included in every major decision about the ranch. A year after their wedding, Catherine discovered she was pregnant. She told Joshua one evening as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, and he let out a whoop of joy that probably frightened the cattle half a mile away. "We're having a baby," he said, wonder in his voice. He placed his hand on her belly, which was still flat. "Our baby. Are you happy?" Catherine asked, though she could see the answer in his face. "I've never been happier in my entire life, except maybe the day you said yes to marrying me, and the day I found you in that snow, because that's the day that led to all of this." Their son was born in early spring of 1879, a healthy baby boy with his father's dark hair and his mother's gray eyes. They named him James Henry Shepherd, and he was absolutely perfect. Mrs. Chen helped with the delivery, her experienced hands bringing the baby safely into the world while Joshua paced anxiously downstairs until he heard his son's first cry. When Catherine placed James in Joshua's arms for the first time, watching her strong cowboy husband hold their tiny son with such careful tenderness, she felt her heart might burst with love. "Hello, little one," Joshua whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "Welcome to the world. Your mama and I are going to love you every single day of your life. That's a promise." Life settled into a wonderful rhythm. The ranch prospered, growing each year. Joshua's reputation as an honest dealer and skilled cattleman spread, and soon they were supplying beef to markets throughout Colorado and beyond. Catherine managed the finances with a shrewd eye, and they were able to expand, buying adjoining land and increasing their herd. James grew into a bright, energetic toddler who loved following his father around the ranch and being doted on by Mr. and Mrs. Chen. 2 years after James's birth, Catherine gave birth to a daughter they named Sarah Rose, and 2 years after that, another son they named Daniel. Their home was full of love and laughter, everything Catherine had never had with Walter, and everything she dreamed of in her darkest moments. She and Joshua never took their happiness for granted, both remembering too well how close they'd come to never having this life. One evening in the summer of 1884, Catherine and Joshua sat on their porch as they often did after the children were asleep. 5 years of marriage, 3 children, a thriving ranch, they had built something beautiful together. "You ever think about that night?" Catherine asked, leaning against Joshua's shoulder. "The night you found me, sometimes," Joshua admitted. "I think about what would have happened if I'd taken a different route, if I'd decided to push through the storm instead of seeking shelter. You would have died out there, and I never would have known what I was missing. But you didn't take a different route. You found me. You saved me." Joshua turned to look at her, his eyes serious. "We saved each other, Catherine. You gave me something I didn't even know I needed, a partner, a family, someone who sees the world the way I do. You made me complete." Catherine kissed him softly. "I used to think that night in the storm was the worst thing that ever happened to me. Walter throwing me out to die, the cold, the fear. But now I think it might have been the best thing, because it brought me to you. It brought me home." "This will always be your home," Joshua said firmly. "You and the children, you're my whole world. Everything I do, everything I build, it's all for you." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the stars come out over the mountains, listening to the peaceful sounds of their ranch settling in for the night. Inside the house, their children slept safely. In the stable, Mr. Chen was checking on the horses one last time. In the kitchen, Mrs. Chen was preparing tomorrow's bread dough. Everything was as it should be. The years continued to pass in contentment. James grew into a thoughtful boy who loved books as much as ranch work, already showing signs of having inherited both his parents' best qualities. Sarah Rose was fearless and kind, always bringing home injured animals to nurse back to health. Daniel was gentle and observant, preferring to watch and learn before jumping into anything. Joshua and Catherine added a fourth child to their family in 1886, a daughter named Grace who had her father's smile and her mother's determination. The house was chaotic and noisy and absolutely perfect. As the children grew older, Catherine began teaching them their letters and numbers, essentially running a small school from their home. Other families in the area heard about it and asked if their children could attend as well. And soon Catherine had 8 students learning in a converted barn on the ranch property. Joshua supported her completely, even hiring a young man to help with some of her ranch duties so she'd have time for teaching. Watching her with the children, both their own and the others, filled him with pride and love. She was exactly who he'd always imagined when he'd thought about having a wife, and so much more than he could have dreamed. Mr. and Mrs. Chen remained with them through all the years, becoming beloved honorary grandparents to the children. Mr. Chen taught James and Daniel to whittle and shared stories of his homeland. Mrs. Chen taught Sarah Rose and Grace to sew and cook, passing on traditions from her own childhood. One spring day in 1889, 12 years after that fateful night in the blizzard, Catherine stood in her garden planting vegetables while watching her 4 children play in the yard. James, now 10, was helping Daniel, who was 6, build a fort. Sarah Rose, 8 years old, was picking wildflowers with 3-year-old Grace toddling after her. Joshua came up behind Catherine and wrapped his arms around her waist, resting his chin on her shoulder. "Happy?" he asked, though he already knew the answer. "Beyond measure," Catherine said, leaning back against him. "Sometimes I have to pinch myself to make sure this is real, that I really have all this, you, the children, this beautiful life we've built. It's real," Joshua assured her, kissing her cheek, "and it's ours forever." That evening, after the children were in bed, Catherine and Joshua made love slowly and tenderly, taking their time with each other the way they'd learned to do over years of marriage. Afterward, wrapped in each other's arms, they talked about the future, about James eventually taking over the ranch, about Sarah Rose's dream of becoming a veterinarian, about adding more classrooms to accommodate more students at Catherine's school. "We should write it all down," Catherine said suddenly. "Our story, how we met, everything that's happened, so the children will know someday." "You think they'd believe it?" Joshua asked with a smile. "That their father found their mother half frozen in a blizzard and breathed life back into her lungs. It's the truth. And it's a good story, one that shows them that even when everything seems dark and hopeless, life can change in an instant. That love can come from unexpected places. That good people still exist in this world." Joshua considered this, then nodded. "All right, we'll write it down, our legacy to them." And so they did, spending evenings together recording their story in a leather-bound journal. They wrote about the night in the storm, about Joshua's desperate ride to Kansas, about Walter's crimes and their eventual wedding. They wrote about the early days of their marriage, about the births of each of their children, about the joys and challenges of building their ranch and their life together. Years later, when James was a grown man with children of his own, he would read that journal to his sons and daughters, and they would listen with wide eyes to the tale of how their grandmother was saved from death by their grandfather's kindness and courage. The story would be passed down through generations of shepherds, a reminder that love and goodness can triumph over cruelty and darkness. But on that spring evening in 1889, all that mattered was the present moment. Catherine and Joshua sat together at their desk, the lamp burning low, writing their history with joined hands. Outside, the Colorado mountains stood eternal watch over their ranch. Inside, their children dreamed peacefully. Catherine paused in her writing and looked at Joshua, seeing the silver starting to thread through his hair at the temples, the fine lines around his eyes from years of squinting into the sun while working the ranch. He was still the most handsome man she'd ever seen, still the one who made her heart race when he smiled at her. "I love you," she said simply. "More than I could ever put into words." Joshua lifted her hand and kissed her knuckles. "I love you too." From that first moment until my last breath, Catherine Shepard, you're my everything. They went back to writing their story, documenting their love for their children and grandchildren and all the generations yet to come. It was a story of darkness and light, of death and rebirth, of a love that had been kindled in the worst of circumstances and had grown into something beautiful and eternal. On a February night in 1877, a man had thrown his wife into a blizzard to die. A cowboy had found her hypothermic and breathed life back into her lungs. And from that terrible, desperate night had come everything good and beautiful in both their lives. That was the story. That was their legacy. And it was a story worth telling, worth remembering, worth passing down through the ages as a testament to the power of love and the resilience of the human spirit. Catherine and Joshua lived long, happy lives together. They saw all their children grow to adulthood, saw grandchildren born, saw the ranch continue to prosper under James's management after Joshua's retirement. They sat together on their porch every evening until the very end, hands clasped, watching the sun set over the mountains they loved. When Joshua passed away peacefully in his sleep at the age of 76, Catherine held his hand and whispered all the things she loved about him, making sure those were the last words he heard in this world. She followed him just 6 months later, unable to bear being parted from her true love for very long. They were buried side by side on a hill overlooking the ranch, under 2 pine trees that would stand for generations. Their headstone read simply, "Joshua and Catherine Shepard. United in life, united in death. A love that conquered all." And in that leather-bound journal that their children preserved and cherished, their story lived on a reminder that even in the darkest storms, hope can be found. That even when someone tries to extinguish your life, there might be someone out there willing to breathe life back into you. That love, true love, is worth fighting for with every breath in your body. The ranch continued to thrive under the care of the Shepard family. The school Catherine had started grew into a proper building that served the community for decades. Mr. and Mrs. Chen's descendants remained part of the Shepard family, their bloodlines eventually joining through marriage generations later. And every February, on the anniversary of that terrible and wonderful night when death and love had collided in a blizzard, the Shepard family would gather together, and someone would read from the journal. They'd tell the story of Catherine and Joshua, keeping their memory alive, honoring the love that had created their family. It was a story with a happy ending, hard-won and well-deserved. It was a story of survival and redemption, of courage and compassion, of a love that had been literally born from the act of breathing life into another person. It was their story, and it was beautiful.